Hold on, listeners. Go over there, so. Wait. Hold on a second. I see that you have removed Darrell Vaz from his position. Let's begin there. Is it a demotion?
It's following? A reshuffle.
Reshuffle? So close to an election?
Reshuffle. I don't know why people are saying so close to an election.
Why did you put up the CXC exams? Why did you bring it forward to earlier July to clear the way so you can have all of July free?
I think you're not giving the full context. Mm-hmm. So recall that the principals and other stakeholders wanted to have the exams earlier. My own perspective, as I had declared at that press conference, is that we should give as much time as possible to the students. But the principals who would know best and the teachers were of the view that the children were already prepared, and stretching it out any longer would just lead to further anxiety.
But then we agreed on July 27th, and then all of a sudden it was brought forward onto mid-July. Am I reading it incorrectly that it is to give you time for the election?
I think that would be a misread. We would never interfere with national CXC exams, regional exams for political reasons. That doesn't make sense. No.
Right. So you said I could be wrong, but am I wrong that you're looking at August for the election?
You could be wrong.
But am I?
You could be.
Well, you won't say that I am. Yes? But go back to Darrell Vaz.
No,
I think the reshuffling. Why? Why at this time?
Because we have critical issues to deal with. You're dealing with water just a while ago, and that is one of the perennial problems. We're going through difficult periods now with the COVID pandemic, now more than ever. Sanitation is important, but we're also going through a drought period, a period of low water production and low distribution capacity as well. We have invested heavily in infrastructure development for water.
Yes.
But it really now needs a driver. I look at the overall policy. I ensure the budget is secured, but there are certain operational details that require a minister like Minister Vaz, who is very enterprising and who is a good driver of initiatives.
But you're saying that your reshuffling has nothing to do with the Hollywell bid, which people believe it was a bad error of judgment on his part to have made an application for land under his portfolio?
As Prime Minister, I have to look at all matters, all considerations. And it is very important that stakeholders are in a position where policy decisions can be accepted. I think the issue, as Minister Vaz has agreed, was poor judgment. He has said that he did not look at the perspectives that were subsequently brought to his attention. And he understands and acknowledges that maybe it is best that he's refocused. And he is very happy to go to water. It's a new challenge. It's an area where he can show that his ministerial talent is bringing value to the people. And the truth is, when I listen to the radio programs and I get... I do listen, but I don't listen every day. But
to the armchair specialists.
Not to the armchair
that's
specialists.
That's what you call us.
No, I wasn't referring to you.
Well, that's what we're called, aren't we all?
No, but no. I mean, the people are complaining about water. If you listen to all the programs.
Yeah.
But great progress has been made in water. But the problem is so overwhelming, it's so huge, that even the progress that is made pales in comparison.
That is true.
And remember now, especially in the corporate area, for over a year, several communities were without water because a critical piece of infrastructure, a 50-year-old infrastructure, broke down. We have replaced that.
I know. I get the complaints here. Just want to go back and to be very clear. Are you saying that the Hollywell bid for the land was a matter that you took it under active consideration when you reshuffled Darrell Vaz out of...
That would have been one consideration. There are other considerations. Remember, there was no minister without portfolio, or even a junior minister who would have had direct oversight over the water and housing portfolio for a little while.
Right.
After Colonel Charles Jr. took up representational politics. So that was a consideration. Hollywell's situation was a consideration. But the most important thing in my mind is the economic recovery. Now, even before the Hollywell situation, I had tasked Minister Vaz to deal with, one, a special water task force to get trucked water to communities. I tasked him to deal with the BPO situation under the special economic zones, and I had tasked him to mobilize the construction sector to restart their work and building activities. So he was actually playing a role and did very well in that area. And so it all came together as an appropriate thing to do at this time.
Okay, so you talked about the economic considerations within COVID now. I've watched you and I've watched the team just trying to navigate the waters with COVID. I cannot say, and I've said it on this program, I cannot say that I'm displeased with the efforts that you have made. I cannot, because the issues that you have to balance, for the most part, I think you've got them right. The areas where you have not got them right, I would have mentioned on this program. But let me ask you, in light of the realities, the numbers coming out of the United States, yesterday one of the highest numbers for daily total, are you now rethinking our protocol, particularly related to New York, to Texas, and some of those high confirmed cases states coming to Jamaica?
Our protocol is always under consideration. So a rethink isn't the appropriate term. When I leave you, I go to our regular Friday meeting to review, examine, monitor, evaluate, and we do that weekly. Now, remember, when we took the decision, we were clear about the risks and we presented the risks to the public. But we couldn't keep the borders closed forever. We have to bring home our Jamaicans. Many of them were in dire situations, having to be living in conditions that were considered inappropriate. Many of them would have by now run out of money. Many of them would have overstayed their welcome where they are. And many of them were becoming fatigued and psychologically stressed. So we just could not keep our borders closed. We had to bring home our Jamaicans. And then we had to bring home people who may not be Jamaican by passport, but they live here, they have family here, they have business considerations here. Jamaica is where their home is.
Yes.
So we had to bring them home as well.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if you're going to do that, you could always consider how to reopen the tourism industry. And I believe we have put in place the protocols, we're watching it, we're observing it, but we have always said, we have set a tripwire, we have set a threshold, that if we pass that threshold, we want to bring in 10,000 people by June 30th, and we expect that 2.5% or lower will be tested positive. We can manage 2.5% in terms of people who will have to quarantine in state facility, who may require medical care and attention and all the other resources that go into containing. Above that, we would have to shut down and rethink how we move forward. The last time I checked, we're still below the
2.5.
the threshold, but anything could happen. We are noticing 2 cases, 2 areas that we have to pay close attention to. The Ministry of Health would have sent out a release yesterday.
Is that West Kingston?
West Kingston, and I believe there's another case emerging in the flanker community. We are going to be acting swiftly and decisively to ensure that there is no spread. Out of that, there is not another outbreak. It will detract from what we're doing. It will divert resources from what we're doing at the 2 airports, but it is critical that we do not have another case of local outbreak.
I understand the balance. You probably saw the EU at the moment is contemplating not allowing US visitors because of what is going on in the United States. At what point in time do you say you've got your 2.5% threshold, but the risk is too great that we need to maybe to say, if you're coming here, we're going to quarantine you for 14 days. Or we're going to say, if you're coming from some states in the United States, don't come at all. When do we get to that?
So we have been at that point. So I've been very clear. If you are ill, if you have symptoms, if you have been exposed, if you're from a high-risk group, reconsider coming to Jamaica. If you come to Jamaica follow the protocols. One of the issues we have would be people who have come, they have been tested, and we say go home and quarantine. Now, different countries have different standards for quarantine. Some countries say you can quarantine, but you're allowed to go out.
Right.
That would be probably the UK, what the UK has done in terms of how they have instituted their quarantine. Our quarantine is strict. You must come in and stay indoors. We tell you.
This is for Jamaica,
For
not
Jamaica.
for visitors.
For Jamaica. If you're being quarantined in Jamaica, that is what is required.
As a visitor?
Even as a visitor, you should quarantine indoors.
The problem with that,
No, but
Prime
hold
Minister,
on, but hold on.
Go ahead.
So the protocol now is you quarantine until you get your test
result.
Now, many persons come in and they're not quarantining, so they are out and about.
Yes.
And that is dangerous. Now, after you've gotten your test result and your test results say you're negative, then we place you under a different measure, which is a stay-at-home measure. And the stay-at-home measure means, one, you are to work from home, meaning because you have people coming in on work permits who want to get right back into the workplace. We're saying, no, wait out the incubation period before you go back to work. You are allowed to leave your home once per day to deal with what is considered the necessaries of life, to get food, medicine and medical attention, to conduct a financial transaction if you must. We are not allowed to go and oversee business, which is in the stay-at-home order for the 65 years and older. We don't recommend that you go to church or to funerals and weddings, and you should stay indoors as much as possible. Wait out that incubation period. Because even after you're tested negative, the viral load may have been so low at the time when you test that you're not showing symptoms. Afterwards, it could develop and you could become infected. So we insist on you being faithful to the stay-at-home orders and the quarantine orders.
I'm not so much bothered about the Jamaicans because I know the protocols are clear for that. You can quarantine them, you can stay at home. It's the visitors. When they go to the hotel and if the test comes back positive, what happens to that visitor?
Well, there are protocols in place. We have seen that has happened, and we are now putting in place, well, I believe it by now would be in place, the facility to host them, which would be of a standard equivalent to what they would have booked. And some of them...
In the hotels?
They are allowed isolation in some of the hotels that have the capabilities, but there is no consideration for a specific hotel where that will be done. So
what if the stay is shorter than the 14 days isolation that they would require?
So there is now, as I go back to my meeting now, we're discussing how we could provide the facility to repatriate through a particular insurance initiative, which Minister Bartlett, I'm sure, will announce shortly. So there is an insurance arrangement being put in place.
Right.
But you know, some persons have come in, they have their own facilities, and they come for 3-4 days and they're gone. They have their private aircraft and they leave. We haven't seen a high number of tourists testing positive.
Really?
No, we haven't seen a high number. And what we have also, remember now, our protocols would be clear in the public domain. So a tourist coming would be thinking, would I, I was here, I was exposed to something, would I really want to go on my vacation and be tested positive, and then that would ruin my vacation? So a lot of people are making their decisions up front, which makes it easier for us. But for the nation, however, we should remember that the tourists are under what is called a stay-in-zone order.
Yes, but the stay-in zone, let me go to the break and come back and deal with that. A surprise guest in studio, the Prime Minister of Jamaica. Thank you, listeners. We're back with you on the hotline. Absolutely surprise visit from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, Andrew Holiness. Didn't expect him, so haven't been able to pull up my X-Files. Some matters that I know people have been asking questions about, and rightly so. We're just talking them through. Prime Minister, we're back with you on the visitors.
Yeah, the visitors are under a special measure under the Disaster Risk Management Act, which is called the stay-in-zone orders.
Yeah.
And what has happened is that the Ministry of Tourism has delineated geographical
Yeah.
area as the COVID resilient corridor, where all the hotels and facilities in that area are certified as meeting the protocols and standards, and so they would be able to operate in this phase of the reopening of the tourism industry. So the tourists have to stay in that area, and therefore it would minimize the risk to the greater population.
I've heard the policy. I watch all of the press briefings live. What I don't get is if the visitor decides to go out of the COVID resilience corridor, who is going to police him? Who is going to sanction him if he does do that? And I don't think there's any sanction for that.
So let's not use the word police him, because that's not the intention. The intention is to have people comply by virtue of the clarity and a moral suasion that is applied. Now, this is not to say that breaches will not be prosecuted. I want to make that distinction.
Under what?
So, under the Disaster Risk Management Act, the Disaster Risk Management Act carries its own structure of offenses. So, persons are reminded about this. Now, say what you want about our tourism industry, that it is an exclusive industry, it's all inclusive. In that sense, it's gated in a sense. But the truth is that it did facilitate earlier reopening because the resorts and the hotels all have a certain level of control. So it is from the airport, your bus from the airport to your resort area, and your resort area has security and it is controlled. The guest management systems there would advise the guests that stay in the zone. It is for your safety, it's the safety of the population. So I think there is a high level of compliance. And I'm not seeing a problem. There may be errant people who might decide to come out. Now, if that is discovered, the first thing to do is to warn. And if it is persistent, then it would be prosecuted.
By the time the people are gone?
But that is the nature of the low risk of how we have crafted the reopening, that they are in zone. The percentage of people that will not comply would be very small, and therefore the impact on the local population we expect to be small.
What about the electronic monitoring that you have for citizens, the virtual walls? Why didn't the tourists have that kind of monitoring?
Well, everybody downloads the Jam COVID app. It gives you, and I want to take out this issue of electronic monitoring, because some people have a fear that somehow the state is tracking, or it is applied under specific conditions. So if you are under quarantine, then we use, especially home quarantine, then we use the app to create what is called a geofence. If you come out of that geofence, then an alert is sent to the monitoring station.
Yes.
And the monitoring station would then be able to check up on you. It is not intrusive, it's not invasive, we're not trying to track you or snoop on you or anything like that. No, that's not what we're trying to do. We're trying to minimize the risk of someone not maintaining the quarantine.
So why not for visitors? I understand the reason behind it. Why didn't you use it for visitors?
No, firstly, if you have too many persons on the app, the monitoring behind it would increase, and that would diminish your ability to respond to breaches. So we have to be strategic. The issue now is, where is the risk? And the risk is for someone who is being sent home on home quarantine, coming into communities, breaching the quarantine.
So what about the tourists going to hotels, interacting with the workers? The workers
right,
have to go
so
home.
the app wouldn't treat with that. The app wouldn't deal with that. I mean, so there's a different set of protocols now, because when we decided to open the industry, we spent a lot of time ensuring that the workers would be protected, because you're right, the threat is not so much the tourist to the community, the threat is the worker interacting with the tourist then going back to the community. And that is why we instituted testing even for tourists, because there's a big argument whether or not we should test tourists, and we are testing tourists. The testing period is to give us a sense of what the real risk is. Once we go through that 2-week or 3-week testing period, then we can understand what the risks are. So far, we have not seen a risk from workers transmitting to communities. So far, we haven't seen that. workers will be tested as well, which we would have to in order to truly establish that risk. But we haven't seen any transmission taking place so far between workers in the tourism industry and communities.
But a test at the moment, we can't just walk into a hospital and say, I want a COVID test. You'd need to be having symptoms.
Yes, because testing has to be strategic. If it were that case, then we would be dragged all over the place with not a cohesive strategy as to identifying persons who really need to be confirmed.
Right, okay. Let's move on to, well, somebody's asking, exactly what is the protocol for tourists at the moment? You come, say, from Florida. You enter our airport. Would you get a test, mandatory test by virtue of coming from Florida?
Anywhere in the United States.
Anywhere from the U.S. No.
Anywhere from the US,
You're tested at the airport.
At the airport, yes.
And then what?
Well, you go through, I'm glad you asked the question. People are relying heavily on the test as the main security. The main security is the screening. So you come in and the screening operates at two levels. The first level is the observation of physical symptoms. Temperature check, is a person coughing and sneezing, any kind of behavior that would suggest that there is some underlying issues going on. And then there is the risk assessment. Where are you coming from? Where did you travel through? Are you from a high-risk group? Are you a nurse? Did you work in a hospital? Questions about exposure and history. And then we also ask where you're going in Jamaica. Now, if you're going to the resilient corridor, then definitely we know that becomes a responsibility of your host, your resort, your hotel, and the protocols are in place for that. Then you are tested if you say you come from the United States. And then after that, most hotels transport their visitors, or there are arrangements made. The people who are carrying them, the transport operators, they are already trained with protocols, how they should operate, the mask wearing, hand sanitization, and so forth. And they're transported to their hotels. So at this phase of the reopening, the interaction of the tourists with the general population is very limited.
And then after the test result comes, if the result is negative, the visitor is still expected to be circumspect on the property?
Remain, for the entire period of their vacation, they are under the stay-in zone orders, yes.
You stay in zone, but you still go to the pool, you go to the bar.
Yes.
So that if you go through the incubation period and you start showing symptoms, you may have infected some of the very workers that are interfacing with you.
That's the risk we face. And so the real safety for us is at the airport, it's a screening. So we already have information on the guest. And then the surveillance. That's something that we haven't spoken about yet. But eventually, as we progress through this pandemic, we will have to now improve our surveillance. That is, to quickly identify persons who are ill, put them in quarantine, and treat them. So the surveillance is what would have picked up the situation in West Kingston, the situation in St. James, and other situations. Jamaica has a very good surveillance system. It is under stress because we have had to divert resources to put them at the airport and other places to conduct testing. But eventually, over time, we will have to return to the surveillance system.
Right. So if you are a returning resident, well, not a returning resident, a visitor who is a Jamaican but who lives overseas.
Yes.
And you come from Florida, for example, you go through your mandatory testing at the airport.
Yes.
And you're going to a home in Jamaica.
Quarantine at home.
For 14 days.
The quarantine until you get your result, and then you're under stay at home. But it depends as well, because suppose you are a nurse and you work in a hospital where there was significant cases. We would want to be careful and say to you, quarantine. So the officers, the authorized officers at the airport, having looked at your history, can recommend, well, not recommend, they will order whether or not you go home under quarantine. When you get your results, you continue under quarantine, or you continue under stay-at-home orders.
Ah.
So it is. So right now we are really on a risk management strategy.
Right. I have a couple of things I want to go through before you have to go, Prime Minister. We had Professor Alveston Bailey, who was a former president of the Medical Association of Jamaica, I think. He proposed yesterday on Beyond the Headlines that if a visitor comes to Jamaica and tests positive, we should repatriate that visitor immediately. You ever thought of that?
As I said, we are looking into how that can be done. Remember now, there are protocols that we as a country have to follow, being, we are part of the WHO system. So you really can't send back someone who is tested positive on a commercial aircraft. There would have to be particular arrangements around that, and that is what they're working out now. So the insurance system, which would have the ability to repatriate and so forth, that is being done now.
Okay. We had an incident recently where a number of us were shown this insignia on the Order of St. Michael and St. George, which our Governor General, by virtue of being knighted, as well as other Governors General in the Commonwealth, seem to wear this insignia. And it represents, as I'm looking at the release from the Governor General, St. Michael the Archangel as being triumphant over Satan, and Satan is represented as a black man lying on the ground with the Archangel's foot on his head. Have you seen it?
When I saw it, I was totally appalled. I reached out to His Excellency. We had a discussion. His Excellency was equally concerned, and we devised a strategy as to how we would treat with it. And you would have seen the Governor General's statement as a result of that. My own view is that the current sensitivities that prevail are important. I think the reawakening of the consciousness of who we are as a people is very important. And as a government, we are very sensitive to these matters. So the appropriate, we reached out to the appropriate people, and I think they have indicated that certain changes will be made. I don't want to say too much. That is the purview of His Excellency, and I'm certain that he will keep the nation informed as these matters progress.
So Kingshouse statement is a statement sanctioned by Jamaica House?
the head of state is the Governor General. I am the head of government. So we must respect the position of the head of state. So yes, it is in sync with how we view things.
Right. And even as he petitions UK for perhaps a change,
I wouldn't use a petition. We have made our position known.
How have you made that position known? Is there a letter sent?
His Excellency would be the appropriate person to address that. But as I've said, we have done it in using the appropriate channels.
No, you have to tell us this. It is so big, Prime Minister. It's a demonstration of what I call institutional racism. And you, as a post-independence leader, the first and only in our history. Which is
why I've crafted it in that way. That I was totally appalled. As I said, when I saw it, you see, the reawakening of our consciousness is very important, because many persons would have seen that. By the way, this is the first time I'm seeing it. I've never really examined those emblems, but when I saw it, bearing in mind the consciousness that is now awakened in us, I was appalled, and I called him late at night. And I said, Excellency, have you seen what is being circulated? And he said yes, and we had a conversation about how we will treat with it. And he acted immediately.
Which is what? He said he will seek a revision of the image to the Lord Chancellor of the Order of St. Michael. What does that mean? Has a letter been sent to the Chancellor?
Why I'm being very guarded in what I'm saying is I haven't had an update since he has sent out the release. So he may have sent a letter, I'm not sure. So I don't want to comment on what I'm not sure. But what I do know is that he has reached out. Whether it is in a letter, a telephone
Yes.
call, I'm not sure. So which is why I can't
And
answer.
why I'm pressing you on it, Prime Minister, I heard you at one of your press conferences rightly condemn
Yes.
the killing of George Floyd.
Yes.
And I thought that was brilliant. I've heard you condemn the killing of Suzanne Bogle because the circumstances were just questionable and wrong. So I'm suggesting and asking whether, even though the GG has sent something out, that you being appalled is not sufficient for you to state unequivocally what you suggest is to be done and by what time for
So-
us to recommission this particular order.
So I'm stating unequivocally that that is inappropriate. And I'm stating it on your program, which is a wide-reaching program. But as I've said earlier, on these matters, we have a head of state. The matter relates to him in particular. My duty would be to speak with the head of state with due respect to the position. And I believe that that was done and the change will be made.
This is a man who never wanted to be a governor general, never asked himself to be a governor general. And in fact, you did not
No.
make the appointment. But part of the reason he is the governor general is because since post-independent Jamaica, we have not made the changes to remove a representative of the Queen from being the head of state. Are you not ashamed that so many years after, we have not made that move to change the constitution, remove all of the oppressive signs, symbols from our existence and rewrite the history? And what do you intend to do about it, Prime Minister?
You know, when the matter came up, I got a text message from someone who gave military service to Jamaica. And it was a very useful text pointing out that this was not the only emblem and insignia and so forth that we should change, that we really need to change a lot of the symbols of our nation. And I totally agree with him. He also pointed out that it is not something that you can do overnight, or it is something that has to be thought out very carefully. Because as a military man, he was pointing out that, you know, even in the JDF and the JCF, there are certain insignia and symbols that are worn, and all of those would have to be changed. They did send me some suggestions as to how they could be changed, what they could look like, and I'm going to pull that file again now that you have raised it, and I'm going to look at it to see whether or not we could do something in short order. But bear in mind, Emily, these things require deep consideration. In fact, it would be a national mobilization about looking at all our symbols. The challenge with everything else is, given what we have to do now, the economic recovery, how do we do it? So what I would say to you, and I will assure the nation, that like everybody else, it is something that I find personally repulsive. It is something that is important to me as a post-independent Jamaican to truly establish who we are as a people. But the conversation has to be done in a very dignified way. We have to do it with great analysis of the past, of our history, so that we get it right the first time we change.
Right, so will you commit that were you to win the election after August 2020, the election you will call for August 2020, will you commit?
I will not say anything.
I'm saying it.
Yes, so that's your date.
Will you commit that in the new term under a JLP administration that you will set in place the appropriate ministry personnel to have a relook at the Constitution to move us on the path of proper independence that we should have been on since 1962, and to do what you can to have a recommissioning of all of these emblems?
So a lot of these things would require, which is why I'm very guarded, it would require us to have a referendum on some issues.
Yes.
And we have already committed to establishing what we call a grand referendum. Because what I'm fearful of is the piecemeal change. You change one thing here, you change another thing here. And I must tell you that some of the things that we have to confront with now are as a result of piecemeal changes in our constitution where some things don't fit other things.
Yeah.
And it creates a legal nightmare. It creates a policy nightmare, which is why I'm saying that if we're going to do this thing, it is not something that you can rush. It's not something that you can do in a haphazard way. It has to be carefully and properly studied. What I can commit to
yes, I want
is to
that
put
commitment.
the process in place
Yes.
to do it. As I had said before, that I believe that we should go to the grand referendum to finally get the people's view on certain of these matters that determine what I call the architecture of our nation, the structure of our nation. We didn't do it this term because our focus was on our economic recovery, addressing poverty, and dealing with our national security.
Okay.
And
So
I have to be frank.
you commit
this
to
is
putting in place.
Yes, this is something that
the
I
system to do it.
personally am committed to, and I don't think anybody can question it.
All right.
Personally
I
committed
have a
to
couple
that.
minutes.
Yes,
Wow. The entire country almost is under states of emergency.
not quite, but
About 7 out of 12 parishes,
we have
more
a
than
few.
half.
yeah,
And you're
yes,
still failing in
that's
that.
not the entire. No, and
Your murder is still not down over last year.
and that is
nationally.
That is a statistical fact which we don't argue.
Yeah.
But it is certainly lower than it was at its highest point during our term, which was in 2017.
What more can you do?
Much more is there to be done. And I want to reject this idea totally that the SOEs have not worked. The SOEs have worked excellently where they are in place.
What's the point if the overall numbers are not down?
No, the
You send the criminals out of St. James into other places.
No.
How do you accept that as working?
Which is a challenge I have with the analysis that is given. We analyze murder in Jamaica as if it is a simple issue, without recognizing that there are some driving factors that are deep. Our murders are inextricably linked to the neighborhood in which we are.
Yes. But you simplified it when you promised the people that we could leave our doors open after the election.
No, I expressed a hope,
you
a
didn't
dream.
say it was a hope.
It is a hope,
a
dream,
promise.
a vision, and yes, a commitment.
Let me ask you
And
before we go.
I know, Emily, there are many people now in Jamaica. It's very surprising, you know. I went to a community in North West St. Anne, or Southwest St. Anne, I believe it was. And in that community, I won't call it in because I really don't want anything to happen to that community. The people there said, Mr. Holiness, we sleep with our windows and doors open.
Of course, there are some
There
communities.
are many communities
Very
in Jamaica.
few, but you promised
Not
all
ma-
of
no,
Jamaica.
no, Emily, I have to contradict that.
Prime Minister, hold on. Time is up on me.
Yes.
There's another question I want. I want you to answer the question whether we should not have local and general government elections in one, whilst you do 10 push-up with me on the hotline. So
Lord
go
have
down.
mercy.
Your cameramen are here, so go down and let me see if you
Ready?
can you do both elections in one.
Yes, we can.
And your cameraman only depend you, not depend me. I'm gonna beat you. Can you save money and do the elections in one go?
About $750 million.
Will you do it?
Well, that's a discussion ongoing.
When you hope to have the end to that discussion?
Well, I believe we might have to change some laws.
Well, that's about all the time we have for you. Thank you,
About
Prime
more than
Minister.
10.
Thank you, Prime Minister.
That was about 15.
Time for meditation and news.